you think as a chess player? What kind of type are you? Do you know that? It took me a long time to realize that I was a special type, and and not the one I thought I was. So today I will delve into a model or a framework on determining how you make chess decisions. It's based on an Eisenhower Matrix, and the four player types are divided into what's called activists, reflectors, pragmatics, and theorists. And I'm going to talk a lot about that, how to determine who you are yourself, what sort of kind of player these four types are, and what to do against them. And and just to make it easier, I'll also explain a little bit about which one in the world top is what kind of players. So the original framework was I think Lars Bo Hansen's book, Foundation of Chess Strategy. It's a very old book where he used a lot of business model. Not all of them made sense, but this matrix I think was rather good on how to make decisions. And it's been used by another great author, Carsten Müller, who recently sent me two books on the world champions, where he uses this setup for analyzing how they play the end game. And that's very explained. But okay, to avoid all fuss, I'll just show you how the matrix works. So ready for a nice little show over here. Here we have it. On the top end you see facts. That is concrete variation. That is lines. That is what you can see. And then we have general concepts. That's something like weaknesses, positional considerations, all sorts of general rules of thought. Then you have intuition. That is something you sense. And then you have logic. That's something you sort of deduct from the facts. And we have the four types. If we use this Eisenhower matrix, by the way, you can make all sorts of things in these kind of matrices, but this kind of makes sense. And I haven't thought of something that was better to determine a player's style or the way to they find their decision on the chessboard. So let's see, activists, facts and intuition. Who's that? That's someone like Tal or Anand or Shirov. They will attack. They will feel. They have a great sense for the initiative. They're not that much into structure, and maybe I think we all start out as activists somehow, where we're not very schooled. We don't know what chess logic is. We don't know any general concept. So we just move the pieces out and see what they can do and feel our way. And calculate a few lines. This is the activist style. They have great vision, are very good tacticians usually. They're not that good in defense, and sometimes they weaken their position needlessly. Then we have the reflectors. That's someone like Karpov or Petrosian or Adams or Magnus Carlsen or me. I'm a reflector. And what does that mean? That is, the intuition plays a big role in, and you should not say that it's just something like divine stuff that comes from heaven. No, intuition is trained, of course, and it's based on a lot of things, but it's just that you sense something immediately, like this doesn't look good, this feels wrong, and so on. So it's based more on a feeling than on logic. But you of course also use logic, and you should not don't be sort of confused by this. Everybody use intuition and logic, and everybody use facts and general concepts. You can't play chess without them. It's more which is the most important driver in your decisions. So reflectors are very good at sensing things. They're very good at dominating pieces and so on. But they're not great in sort of long calculations, except maybe Carlsen, and even Petrosian was also not a bad calculator. Then we have the pragmatics, and they're like Fischer is a prime example. I think Lasker, Korchnoi are also great examples. In the book, Lars Hansen says that Kasparov is a pragmatics, while Carsten Müller think he's an activist. So he's more in between the lines here. And then we have, and they are usually very good practical players. You can't bluff a pragmatic. They will just calculate all the way to the end in all the lines and see what you're doing. They are not always really good when nothing is going on. That's a problem they can have. Then we have the theorists. They are very strong in certain kind of endings. They very strongly believe in their way of playing chess. And we have like Steinitz or Botvinnik or Kramnik or maybe even Leko could also be a theorist. But if you look at yourself, and we'll go back so you can see what I'm saying here. If you look at yourself, you can say, okay, how do I make decisions? Do I say this looks like it's from this kind of position, and in these positions, generally this is good, so that's where I start, or do you just start calculating lines all over the place? For instance, this position is from Bobby Fischer versus Michael Tal. It's from Carsten Müller's book, and I kind of like this example because it shows what Carsten calls the Fischer endgame. The rook and bishop versus rook and knight, where the bishop is strongest piece. And Fischer was very strong at this kind of ending. And in general, he was very strong at precise calculation, very long forced lines, and not sort of not no bullshit chess. So here it's white to move and what to do. And this is the thing that here concrete calculation is important. So you say, okay, the black is at the moment threatening. Oops, what's going on here? I should do like this. Oops. Sorry. Oops, I'm at the wrong board. Sorry. So I'll go over to to the chessboard. He's threatening this pawn and this pawn, so they are both hanging. But that's not the most important feature of the position. The most important feature of the position is that these pawns over here are weak. And if one of them drops, the d pawn, if it drops, then the other ones are not going to survive either. And we also see that the bishop is very strong here with pawns on both sides, which the reflector would sense immediately that saying, okay, bishop must be good here. While I think pragmatics, they just calculate that it's good. And of course, they also use general principles. Anyway, Fischer finds a very concrete approach to the position, which pawn to keep, A or G, and it's the G pawn. And this would for some people, would that be scary? Because if you take here, but you quickly realize that if you take here, the king is gonna go Pac-Man mode on the black king side with king g5, something like this. It's just, even though you're temporary 2 pawns up, you're just gonna lose the whole king side, and the pawn's gonna roll really fast, while it will not be very easy to get the pawns moving on the other side. So this is just completely winning for white. Instead, Tal, who's an activist, and that is they sort of feel variations, and they sense long lines, and you can say it's very trained intuition. Anand, when you see Anand, you just see that he sees all these flashy lines coming to him, and they're not always completely correct. Sometimes there are holes in the lines, but they have great vision, and of course are very good at activating pieces and seeing how to, if you look at, for instance, players from Azerbaijan is a very prime example, because they all have this special characteristic that they love to activate their pieces, and they're very good at it. Anyway, king g5, of course this was the plan, going for the king side with the king, and bishop f4, and we see that the bishop is very strong here. It covers this pawn, it cuts like a razor here, and the knight is not very good. Here the best defense would have been knight c5. White will probably still do something like this, but it gives better chances of survival. Knight f8 was a little bit passive. Rook d6, white immediately shows that, okay, my bishop is so much stronger than your knight, and you're just gonna get in serious trouble if we exchange it. But okay, a5. What about now if you take knight take, king take, take, b5, then the pawn ending is drawn, the computer says. Instead, white plays a nice move. He could play a4. That would probably, as a reflector, that's what I'm always looking at, how to restrict my opponent's pieces and my opponent's activity and my opponent's play. So I would probably play a4 here. Fischer doesn't have these kind of problems with people getting counterplay. He just calculates, is it a problem or is it not a problem? If it's not a problem, I'm not going to prevent it. So he just played kings h6, which really shows the difference between a pragmatic and a reflector, because a reflector would play a4 anytime here, just saying, I'm not going to let your king queen side start rolling. I will keep your pawns on black, and so on, using general principle, fix the opponent's weaknesses on the color you can attack, and so on. Rook e2, getting some counterplay. Rook d2, just controlling it, no problem. The rook is still, the bishop is still much stronger than the knight, and king g7 is looming over the black position. Bishop d6 here, check here, and here it's white to move. Very typical Fischer style. Rook here. And it's actually already a zugzwang. You can't move the knight, you can't move the rook, you can't move the king. So what to do? It's more or less a disaster. You can move the a pawn, but it's just gonna go lost. So with rook b4, so there's and it still doesn't change the zugzwang. So black gave a pawn here, and check, but the king is still active, and Fischer has accurately calculated that there's no problem, even though black's rook did get more active, and b5 preventing, and here, and we see that if he takes on f3 here, we just take this pawn, and everything is completely winning here. So it's not funny. Threatening rook b8, b4, d4. That's also a very concrete approach to the position. You only need one pass pawn to win, and now you're threatening to take on f8 and take on g6 with a completely winning rook ending. So the knight has to go, but the king is still the Pac-Man, and it's eating all the pawns. We see this. And here you just have to be a little bit careful. Fischer was extremely good at being careful in these kind of endings, so he's not going to fall for g6. Knight takes g6, which was the little trick Tal put up. By the way, a player like Tal always have some bombs up his sleeve when he's playing. So here it goes. And Fischer, of course, here, notice this, just very precise calculation. He could play king e4 if he was afraid of anything, but he just sees that there is nothing here, and the pawn is queening, or you lose the exchange. So he has to give up the exchange, and he did do that, like this. King d4 and a4, check, king e8, king d6. Look at that. A lot of players would not have played that, but it's just the best move, dominating this knight totally. And after b3, you play a3. You're not afraid of giving a pass pawn, because you can always stop the pawn, and it's better to have these two pawns left on the board. So this is the Pragmatic in his sort of prime force. This is how he plays. Just to wind up, these kind of players. So how do you know who you are? Have you thought about it? When I was younger, I thought I was a pragmatic, or I knew I wasn't an activist because I was not comfortable with a lot of pieces hanging. and I was, of course, reading a lot of theory. So people thought I was a theorist, but I'm definitely not, because I'm not. I'm mostly into to feeling the game, not theorizing about it, and I never was a theoretician in anything. So I thought I was a pragmatic, but it turns out that I'm not. And after I realized I was a reflector, uh, among others, due to the book by Lars Bo Hansen, I got much better results because I started to go for more quiet maneuvering positions where I have a clear edge. And if you notice in my videos, I talk a lot about weaknesses, weak squares, weak pieces, dominating things, and so on. And it's very typical for reflectors. So what's wrong with reflectors? Well, if you force them to calculate all the time, they will get tired, and that's basically my problem. Anyway, I hope you found this a little bit different video interesting, and thank you for watching. This was GM Talk.